upon thousands of people came up this strike and red. Well, all those people that came up here needed homes to live in, places to shine, and that requires lumber. We started the lot up here in 1874. It actually started up here in California lumber. Went all the way until 1960 on the west side, when we were still doing steam-powered logging operations. Some of the tracks that we're currently riding on belong to the Madera sugar mine operation. They were one of the largest in the world at the time. They were in business from about 1899 until 1931. Everything we're currently riding in, the number 10 pulling us, most of the equipment to the left of us right now is all original logging equipment that was actually still being used until about 1960. As we make our way down the hill here, a few things I'd like to point out to the left. I'm sure you guys have noticed a lot of stuff's been burned and broken. August 29, 2017, we had the railroad fire that started across the street from us. It came down, burned some of our equipment, and it did go on to burn more than 12,000 acres. And then in January of 2021, we had a mono windstorm event. For 7 hours, we had winds ranging from 50 to 150 miles an hour, knocking over and snapping thousands of trees. As we look across the valley of the mountain directly across from us to the left, you'll see some trees at the very top that are a lot bigger than the rest of them. It's actually an elder grove of redwoods that's been untouched by logging and the fires. And then behind us, as we pass this telephone pole, if you look back in the valley, you'll see a very large mountain with a granite top on it. That's Mount Raymond at 8,700 feet. And believe it or not, the train tracks for the operation went around behind that mountain when they were working. Of course, we are a logging train, so there is no way of avoiding hearing me talk about the trees. We have 5 predominant species that you'll find up here. The first being the California black oak, which is ironically the white tree we're passing on the left. The California black oak has a maple light leaf, not a thorny one. It's also the only tree species that's up here that was never logged off for lumber, but was only logged off for firewood to power the steam equipment and to heat homes. The Native American population up here that did use the acorns, they would take the acorns and they grind them up into a powder, soak out the bitter tannic acids in a river, and then they had a flour that they could bake with. They did actually use it for porridges, breads, and cakes and cookies. The second tree species that we have an abundance of up here is the incense cedar. Even though it is called an incense cedar, it is actually not a cedar. It's actually closer related to a cypress tree. It has that long, stringy reddish bark that almost looks like a redwood. It also has a very interesting leaf. It's called a scale leaf. It almost looks like needles, but it is not. Also, that wood is actually one of the predominant woods that's been used for the last couple of decades to make pencils. And it also is great for things like closets and boxes to keep your clothes in, to keep all the moths and bugs away. Another tree species that we have in abundance up here is going to be the white fir. It's very similar to the red fir, except red firs grow up at higher altitudes. White fir is very easily identified by its long, straight, horizontal branches that are completely covered in flat, segmented needles. You will probably recognize it more, though, as the common Christmas tree. We're actually starting to enter Horseshoe Curve. Horseshoe Curve was dug out in 1908 by a Chinese labor force just using picks and shovels. They took all the dirt, loaded it on wheelbarrows and carts, and dumped it to the left side of the track. When you guys checked in, we gave you some postcards. One of the postcards is a photo of this spot, taken in the early 1900s, with no trees, no vegetation, and a log train rolling through it. You are there. Number 4 on the list is going to be the ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pine has that yellowy, orangey, scaly bark that almost looks like puzzle pieces stacked on top of each other. The ponderosa is cherished for its long, straight grain, black and knots. Needles are also very long. They grow to about 11 inches and grow in clusters of 3s. And then we have the final, the bread and butter for the Madera sugar mine operation, would be the sugar pine trees. Sugar pines are the largest pine species in the world. In fact, the largest was found in 2015 in Yosemite National Park. It stood over 274 feet and over 12 foot base. Not only the largest pines in the world, they also produce the largest pine cones. Pine cones can get up to about 25 or 26 inches long, right up to 6 pounds worth of sap. The needles on those trees are very short. They're all clusters of 5, strings of river sugar, 5 river, 5 needles. looking around the forest to see which ones for sure find the most identifiable thing about it is the fact that the line goes from the very ends of the branches, almost like Christmas ornaments. Over there, Sugar Pine Hill is about 3.5 miles down below us in the valley. And train tracks going off in every single direction, very similar to spokes on a wheel. Wherever there was wind to be found, they would run their tracks, clear cut everything, then pick up their tracks, dig a new road bed, and lay down new rail where there was more wood. They actually did this over and over again until they clear cut more than 30,000 acres of forest. That equates to about 1.9 billion board feet of lumber. If you were to take that wood, make each piece 10 feet long by 1 foot wide, it would actually reach around the planet about 11 times. While they were up here clear cutting everything, they did not believe in reseeding of the forest. Everything you see around you in every single direction, with the exception of only a handful of trees, are all under 120 years old and the result of natural regrowth. Speaking of roadbeds, the roadbed that we are on right now, not the tracks, we actually relaid down the tracks on this original roadbed, but this was in use from 1908 until 1924. And then down below us on the right, we see another forest access road, which is now a public road. That was also train tracks as well from about 1920 until 1931. We are rolling on narrow gauge tracks. Our rails are actually 36 inches from rail to rail. Standard gauge tracks are actually 56.5 inches rail to rail. The logging companies preferred to run narrow gauge rail because they had to clear cut less forest, and the trains can take much, much sharper turns. Just a reminder, folks, I do need to make sure that everybody is seated in this trip while we're under motion, please. Thank you. The number 10 that's pulling us right now is a very special engine. It is a Shea design. It was built in 1928. Weighs about 84 tons. Has a top speed of about 12 miles an hour. However, it can hold over 5,000 tons. That's equivalent to about 800 full-size adult T-Rex dinosaurs. It is, like I said, special. It is the largest narrow gauge Shea ever made. It is not what you would think of with a standard steam train. Standard steam trains have horizontal pistons that move sets of 2 to 4 wheels. The Shea design actually has 3 vertical pistons that go down to a drive line. And then that drive line goes to every single axle powered pinion gears, making it a 12-wheel drive locomotive. The Shea design came from a gentleman named Ephraim Shea who lived in Michigan. Ephraim actually started his adult life in the 1800s as a school teacher and an inventor. And then the Civil War happened. He ended up joining the Civil War. And when that was done, he actually became a logger. The only way he could actually move his logs around on his property was using a large wooden sled being pulled by oxen when there was snow on the ground. Ephraim wanted to actually have a year-round logging operation, so he built one of the railroad tracks at Maple on his very first steam train. And unfortunately, the downward force of the trains at the time were breaking his wooden rails. So he mentioned that he took a flatbed rail car, but similar to the covered cars you guys are riding in towards the front, and he slapped a boiler on it and put a chain run into the rear axle. And eventually it got more and more refined until it is pulling us today. Ephraim actually shared his design with Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio. Lima made about 5,000 Shays in all different shapes, sizes, and gauges. And today, there's under 117 left in the world, with most of those actually being in museums. In fact, there's only 5 running on the west coast of the United States. We have the number 10 and the number 15 here. Roaring Camp near Santa Cruz has the other 3. Lima Locomotive Works is actually still in business. They just don't make trains anymore. They actually make tanks for the U.S. military. In a second, we're going to be taking a right turn, and when we do, it's a perfect video and photo opportunities when we sign on to the train, signaling at the crossing. And then there's a chance that we might get to see a blowdown at this turn, where we dump the bottom part of our boiler to remove all the sediment buildup from the day before. has a blowdown. Again, folks, please do. If you happen to have been paying attention to the ground outside, you'll notice that we don't actually have a lot of grass here. We have a different type of plant. That plant is called bear clover. It is unique to the Sierra. It grows nowhere else in the world. However, the loggers at the time, they have a very different name for it. They used to call it mountain misery. It grows in tangles that they would trip on all the time. It also produces a foul-smelling sap that sticks to your clothes and takes forever to wash out. However, the natives like the Miwoks, the Manos, and the Ahlawani did actually use the leaves. They would brew it into a type of tea that they would drink when they had headaches, body aches, and pains. We actually now know today that the leaves have a very high content of acetylsalic acid, which is the main ingredient in aspirin. In a minute on the right side of the train, we're going to be passing a covered shrub called the manzanita. That is Spanish for the lemon. The manzanita tends to grow between 800 and 2,000 feet in elevation. And yes, it does produce a little tiny red berry that kind of tastes like apple. The natives actually use that as well. They would brew that into a type of cider, sometimes incorporating the bear clover when they had stomach aches. It's now pretty much just a food source for the mule deer and the black bear when other food sources are scarce. If you guys are familiar with the gentleman named John Muir, I certainly hope you are here in Yosemite. John Muir was rumored to be a vegetarian or a vegan, and one of his favorite food sources was the manzanita berry. It also is the same color inside as it is outside. This makes it a more working products, including dog toys, because it's completely non-toxic. The Bear Sugar Pine operation, like I mentioned earlier, was one of the largest in the world at the time. They employed over 800 men. They worked 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. Incredibly hard work. Got skilled labor at about 10 cents an hour. Skilled labor such as surveyors and engineers made a nickel more than I do right now at 30 cents an hour. And the loggers, they got paid by the tree. They would sit on every day with their double-bitted axes and crosscut saws to cut as much down as they could to get the largest check they could get. Keep in mind though, when they were here logging, the trees that were here were different. They were truly gigantic. 100 to 200 feet tall, 10 to 15 foot bases. So large, in fact, that sometimes only one 10-foot section of a single tree could have been on a log car at a time. When the trees were cut down, they were dragging them up the mountainside using a large winch called a donkey engine, which is a huge wooden sled with a boiler and a winch drive on it. They would chain one side of the sled down to a tree that was still standing, and then they would drag the logs up to the train. Once at the train, they would chain them down to the cars, and then the train would go down the 3.5-mile journey to the mill. Once at the mill, they would dump the logs off into the log pond, and then the mill would actually rough cut the logs to transportable sizes that could fit onto horse and cart. That horse and cart mill would take a journey for 54 miles down to the city of Madera, where down in Madera, they would actually do all the finishing buckle cutting at those mills. The original journey took 2.5 days. So within the first year, they built what is called a log flume. It's a very large, V-shaped water trough, about 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep. They ran it 69 miles from the mill to Madera. It cut the journey from 2.5 days to just 12 hours to get the wood down there. When the flume was built, it was the longest and largest wooden structure in the world. It cost them about $400,000, and adjusted for today, would be about $16.9 million. With the invention of the flume though, came a new job called the flume herder. And the flume herder's job was to stand on a board about a foot wide, sometimes 40 to 60 feet off the ground, standing on trestle bridges. And they needed to make sure that the pellet continued to freely flow down to Madera. They did live solitary lifestyles of their own cabins along the entire route. And you might be questioning, how did they get their food, mail, or even communicate with the outside world? The workers at the sugar pine mill on their days off would fashion together crew rafts with the spare wood there. Sometimes not even enough space to sit. They would then ride these rafts down the flume, reaching up miles an hour. They would occasionally bring the food and the mail to the herders, and as they passed by their cabins, would throw it into their doors, making the very first DoorDash. Of course, though, the workers would have to find their own way back to work the next day because, unfortunately, water just does not flow uphill. If you guys have ever been to an amusement park that has a log ride, you can thank the Madera Sugar Pine operation for that idea. We're now reaching the lowest point of our journey together, and I certainly hope not mentally. But physically, we're about 500 feet down. We're a 50-story building. We're at the bottom of Lewis Creek Canyon, which has been named after Lewis Creek. That creek is to the right of us right now, but almost impossible to see through the trees. Don't worry though, we are going to be stopping at our loop for about 15 to 20 minutes where you will be able to get out and wander around a bit. And the creek runs right through the middle of where we stop. And speaking of the stop though, folks, we do have bathrooms, trash cans, tables. Feel free to use any of them. If you find yourself needing to use the bathroom though, and you see that wooden outhouse that looks like it was built possibly in the gold rush era, don't use it. Use the porta potty instead and you will be grateful. Also, we've been cruising downhill this entire time. The 10 has not had to put too much work in, but that's about to change when we take a left turn and climb a 9.5% grade. It's 9 feet up per 100 feet travel. That is very steep. In fact, most modern locomotives could not make that grade even without a load. The number 10 up, we go to a 12% grade, pulling 5,000 tons, or about 30 to 40 fully loaded cars. When we start to climb, it will make a lot of noise. It will start to sound like an actual steam train, and I'm just going to let it do the talking.